As the 1960s dawned, Sicily stood on the brink of a violent transformation. Luciano Leggio, a once obscure field guard, had risen to command the ruthless Corleonesi faction, a group that would soon redefine the Mafia's brutal legacy. Sensing the danger, Giuseppe Di Cristina, head of Cosa Nostra in Caltanissetta, took a perilous step, meeting secretly with police. Di Cristina provided a rare view inside the closed world of Cosa Nostra at its highest levels. Leggio's Corleonesi were not bound by tradition. They were driven by an unyielding thirst for power, prepared to annihilate anyone in their path. Di Cristina's warning was stark. The era of the old mafia was ending, and in its place, Leggio was about to impose a reign of terror that would leave the Sicilian Mafia in chaos. Luciano Leggio was born in January 1925, into poverty, far removed from the more privileged world of Dr. Michele Navarra, who would later become his boss. His family struggled to feed their 10 children, so they sent him to a seminary to train as a priest. However, this plan fell apart when he refused to study, and he left school by the age of 9. To make up for his lack of formal education, Leggio later threatened a schoolteacher with a gun, forcing her to teach him to read and write. Despite his rough path, some of his religious teachings lingered. It was said that each evening he would kneel before a crucifix and list the wrongs he believed had been done to him. Behind his back, Leggio was known by several nicknames. He was called the Grain of Fire due to his fiery temper, or the Cripple because of his slight limp. His limp was a result of Pott's disease, a form of tuberculosis affecting his spine, which caused him chronic back pain, fever, and heavy night sweats. Leggio likely caught Navarra's attention at the age of 19, when country wardens caught him red-handed stealing sheaves of wheat after the harvest and loading them onto mules with an accomplice. When arrested, Leggio offered no resistance, but his eyes blazed with anger when one of the wardens kicked him. After spending 3 months in jail, Leggio was sentenced to 1 year and 4 months. Nevertheless, the sentence was suspended, and he was released. Fueled by a desire for revenge, Leggio enlisted Giovanni Pasqua, a soldier who lived next door to one of the wardens. Leggio was determined that those who had wronged him, starting with Pasqua's neighbor Calogero Comiani, would not escape retribution. One evening in March of the following year, 45-year-old Calogero Comiani was walking home on the eastern edge of town. He noticed 2 men trailing behind him, both cloaked in blue woolen garments with hoods pulled low over their faces. Comiani hurried home and shared his concerns with his wife, Maddalena, suspecting that one of the men might be their neighbor, Giovanni Pasqua. The next morning, Comiani began his chores by clearing out the ground floor stable where he kept his horse. As he went to dispose of the horse's dung, he spotted the same hooded figures waiting for him. Panicked, he spotted an open door and ran toward it, only to have it slammed shut before he could get through. Desperate, he raced back to his house, barely managing to knock on the door before one of the gunmen shot him twice. Despite his severe wounds, Comiani stumbled through the door and dragged himself up the stairs. Turning to confront his attackers, he called out to the man he recognized, but the gunman continued to fire, ending his life. Despite Maddalena's testimony identifying both of the murderers, the judicial system dismissed her evidence, and the case was closed. It's around this time that Leggio likely became involved with the mafia. 5 years after the murder of the warden who had apprehended him, police arrested Leggio's accomplice, Giovanni Pasqua, who initially confessed but later retracted his statement, claiming police torture. The court acquitted both Leggio and Pasqua due to insufficient evidence. An appeals court upheld the verdict, dismissing Maddalena's testimony as incoherent and ruling that the murder, occurring 8 months after Leggio's previous arrest, was too distant to be linked. This marked the Corleoneses' first major triumph over Italian justice, a pattern of evading legal consequences that they would continue to repeat for decades. Leggio's success in evading justice brought him considerable prestige in Corleone. He quickly capitalized on this newfound respect by securing a position of power. Choosing an estate he desired, Leggio took a ruthless approach. He assassinated the estate's overseer from behind and then confronted the landlord, saying, "I will take the place of the dear departed." The landlord, familiar with such brutal methods of promotion used by Navarra, raised no objections. Leggio rose to become the youngest overseer in Sicily. He was among Navarra's 10 underbosses and soldiers stationed as enforcers on various estates, including the Ficuzza Wood, a notorious burial site for both bandits and mafiosi. This strategic positioning ensured that the doctor maintained control not just over the town, but also the largest surrounding estates. Navarra made it clear that Leggio was la sua cosa personale, his own personal thing, a nod to the name Cosa Nostra, or our thing. Leggio patrolled the estate on horseback, armed with a riding whip and a hunting rifle, upholding the mafia's traditional role of protecting wealthy landowners' property. This included using violence to quash peasant demands for land ownership, preserving the established order. Conflict soon came to a head in Corleone, as Navarra and his most ruthless enforcer, Leggio, faced off against a young, idealistic resistance veteran determined to challenge their dominance. Like Navarra, Placido Rizzotto came from a mafia background, but he was fundamentally different. Unlike Navarra, who embraced the mafia, Rizzotto rebelled against it. His father, an estate guard and convicted mafioso under Mussolini, had been imprisoned when Rizzotto was only 11. During World War II, the semi-literate Placido Rizzotto was drafted into the fascist army. However, after Italy's surrender on September 8, 1943, following the fall of Sicily, he discarded his uniform and joined the partisans fighting against the Nazis in the Alps. Among the young members of the Garibaldi Brigade, known for their red handkerchiefs, Rizzotto learned to endure hardship and engaged in discussions about liberty and equality. When he returned to Corleone in 1945, his newfound revolutionary zeal earned him the nickname the Northern Wind. Rizzotto became a vocal critic of the mafia's cattle rustling and encouraged peasants to resist the dominance of wealthy landowners. He urged them to take advantage of new decrees passed by the government of national unity in Rome, which granted peasant cooperatives the right to claim land that had been neglected by its owners. In a bold move against both the landowners and the mafia enforcers, Rizzotto led provocative land occupations. Navarra sought to crush peasant protests before they could gain momentum. On one estate, guards fired rifles at protesting peasants, and later that night, shots were fired at the home of the Communist Party secretary. The most extreme instance of such violence occurred on May 1, 1947, when the infamous bandit Salvatore Giuliano and his men opened fire on peasants at Portella della Ginestra, killing 11 and wounding 27. In Corleone, Leggio retaliated against the peasants with brutal force, slashing the throats of hundreds of mules and donkeys and setting fire to barns and straw stacks. Despite these atrocities, no one dared report him to the police. Rizzotto, undeterred, continued his fight, frequently denouncing Leggio and his protectors in speeches, urging peasants to inform the authorities about what they knew. Navarra tried to dissuade Rizzotto from his struggle, but Rizzotto refused to back down. Rizzotto gained a decisive moment against Leggio when the two clashed outside the municipal gardens at the entrance to Corleone. Leggio and his mafiosi had mocked the red handkerchiefs worn by former partisans passing through town. The taunting escalated into a brawl, and someone fetched Rizzotto to try to break it up. Although he initially appealed for calm, Rizzotto was infuriated by the mafiosi's insults. He, too, had worn the red handkerchief during his partisan years. In a burst of anger, Rizzotto grabbed the frail Leggio, lifted him off his feet, and slammed him against a wall, hanging him by his coat on the sharp bars of the garden's wrought iron gate. Despite his father's warnings, Rizzotto agreed to meet with Navarra about 3 weeks after the fight. The meeting was set for the evening of March 10, 1948, on the main street of Corleone, near Navarra's home. But that night, 33-year-old Rizzotto never returned home. On the same night Rizzotto disappeared, a 13-year-old shepherd boy mysteriously died. The boy had been tending his father's sheep outside Corleone when he suddenly fell ill. He was taken to the hospital under Navarra's care. In a feverish state, the boy described seeing a peasant murdered that night on a path at the foot of Rocca Busambra mountain while he guarded the flock. The boy then lost consciousness and soon died. The autopsy revealed he had been poisoned. Investigators later discovered that unidentified friends had brought the boy to Navarra's hospital, but they couldn't prove, as many locals suspected, that the boy had witnessed Rizzotto's murder and that Navarra had administered a fatal injection to silence him. A week after Rizzotto's disappearance, an anonymous letter with poor grammar reached the investigators. The letter warned, "Beware of the people who I tell you were the executioners of Placido. One of them is Leggio." Though the police had little evidence against Leggio 9 months after the murder, they requested his exile to the mainland. Leggio did not appear at the court hearing set to consider the proposal, and from that day, he became a fugitive. Leggio's reputation as an untouchable figure continued to grow. Rumors circulated that he was hiding in an underground tunnel, a mountain hut, a Palermo clinic, or even a luxury seaside hotel. In reality, Leggio didn't need to venture far, as he enjoyed the protection of several local dignitaries, including a baron and his wife, who had an accomplice on their staff aiding him. A year after Rizzotto's disappearance, new testimony about the murder emerged from an unexpected source. Giovanni Pasqua, imprisoned in Palermo and the same man who had assisted Leggio in committing his first murder 4 years earlier, came forward. Pasqua identified the killers of the peasant leader as Leggio, Pasquale Criscione, and Vincenzo Colura, who had previously been Navarra's rival for control of the Corleone clan. Pasqua's testimony came just after the arrival of a determined and charismatic carabinieri captain, Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, in Corleone. Known for his bravery and unwavering commitment to the state, Carlo Alberto was resolute in his fight against the mafia. He made it a point to meet with Rizzotto's parents, showing his personal investment in the case. Rizzotto's murder became the captain's first major case. For 5 months, he relentlessly pursued the 3 suspects. He eventually apprehended both Criscione and Colura, though Leggio remained elusive. During interrogation, Criscione and Colura confessed to the crime. They revealed that on the Rocca Busambra peak, Leggio had shot Rizzotto 3 times, killing him. They had then disposed of the body in a crevice to prevent the crows from detecting the scent of decay. Despite Dalla Chiesa's relentless efforts, the case unraveled when Criscione and Colura retracted their confessions at trial, claiming they had been coerced through torture. Although the prosecution sought life sentences for all the accused, a Palermo court acquitted them due to lack of evidence and revoked the warrant for Leggio's arrest. Before we continue, let's just go back a bit so that we can introduce Provenzano and Toto Riina into this chapter. In 1945, Salvatore Toto Riina likely met Bernardo Provenzano, who was 2 years younger, and the two quickly became inseparable. During this period, Riina was also close friends with his future brother-in-law, Calogero Bagarella. Around this time, they were recruited by Luciano Leggio, despite receiving warnings, Riina from a policeman and Provenzano from his older brother, about the dangers of associating with Leggio. In 1949, at the age of 18, Riina committed his first murder and was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but was released after serving just 6 years in 1955. So getting back to Dr. Navarra, we know that it wasn't until 1948 that the police officially identified him as the head of the Corleonesi family. This led to his court-ordered sentence of 5 years of internal exile on the mainland. However, this sentence was overturned on appeal. He was sentenced to exile once again, but Navarra's lawyers skillfully manipulated the legal system, allowing him to return home after just 1 month in exile. Despite all his cunning, Navarra failed to recognize the growing ambition of his once loyal henchman, While the reserved Navarra adhered to the traditional mafia methods, exploiting influence over rural estates and infiltrating the political system, Leggio sought more aggressive and profitable ventures. One of his most daring schemes involved cattle theft. Leggio formed a gang specifically for this purpose, stealing animals from their owners. After slaughtering and butchering the cattle, they would transport the meat to Palermo for sale. To further capitalize on these ventures, Leggio even established a road haulage company, ensuring the frequent trips to Sicily's capital were even more lucrative. Leggio had ambitious plans to use his trucks for transporting tons of equipment for a new dam intended to supply water to the citrus groves. However, this threatened the long-standing control of local bosses who had monopolized the water supply for over a century, charging exorbitant rates. These bosses quietly persuaded Navarra to oppose the project. Navarra then spread rumors that a dam of such size was dangerous, claiming it would eventually burst and flood Corleone. According to one account, the increasingly frustrated Leggio was sent to Palermo, not just to sell meat, but as Navarra's representative at a rare conference held at the city's Grand Hotel in October 1957. The meeting was attended by Sicilian Mafia bosses and an unprecedented delegation from the American Cosa Nostra, led by Joseph Bonanno. However, it is highly unlikely that Leggio was actually present at this conference. Navarra was too insignificant in the Palermo-centric mafia hierarchy, and it's improbable that the American mafia would endorse or approve the assassination of a provincial Sicilian boss. Yet that is exactly what Leggio would do the following year. Leggio's frustration with Navarra for sabotaging his business plans boiled over, and he directed his anger at Angelo Vintaloro, one of Navarra's lieutenants and a fellow cattle rustler. Vintaloro had strong reasons to oppose the dam, as it threatened to flood his wheat fields and vineyards. In retaliation, Leggio began pressuring Vintaloro to sell his land and leave. One morning in May 1958, Vintaloro entered one of his cellars only to be overwhelmed by the strong smell of wine. Every barrel had been smashed to pieces. It didn't take long for word to spread that Leggio was behind the destruction. Despite his close ties with Navarra, Vintaloro faced the consequences of crossing Leggio. A month later, when his wheat ripened, he had to beg local peasants for days before any dared to help him harvest. So great was their fear of Leggio. Eventually, a few peasants agreed to work, but only in secret and under the cover of night. However, no sooner had they finished than the entire harvest mysteriously disappeared. Once again, rumors pointed to Leggio, who was said to have loaded the sheaves onto his trucks. Despite the mounting pressure, Vintaloro still refused to sell his land. Not long after, he received an anonymous extortion letter demanding money and threatening further consequences if he didn't comply. When Navarra learned of this, he devised a plan to trap the letter's mysterious author. Vintaloro agreed to the plan and set up a meeting near his farm in late June, where several of Navarra's soldiers lay in wait, hidden in a cowshed. As a man approached on the back of a mule, the soldiers opened fire, wounding him in the arm. However, seeing that the man who was still alive was Leggio, the soldiers panicked and fled the scene. On August 2, 1958, a young doctor drove his senior colleague Michele Navarra toward Corleone. However, Leggio had arranged an ambush, and as Navarra and the other doctor drove by, they were forced off the road and shot in a hail of bullets, killing both men. The powerful figure known as Padre Nostro was now out of the picture. Despite Navarra's high rank within the mafia and his influential connections outside it, Leggio managed to eliminate him. The young upstart toppled the boss through a mix of audacity, cunning, swiftness, and brutal violence, a formula that would come to define the Corleonese's approach. Following Navarra's murder, Leggio tasked Rinna with confronting 3 of Navarra's loyalists. When one of them extended his hand as a peace offering, Rinna refused to shake it, and instead demanded they hand over the men who had shot Leggio. In that tense moment, Provenzano and another mafioso appeared, guns blazing. They killed one of the men instantly, while the other 2 made a desperate dash through Corleone's streets. However, they didn't get far. They were both gunned down, with a stray bullet injuring a nearby 2-year-old girl. As Provenzano and his associate hurried down the main street, another of Navarra's men managed to shoot and wound Provenzano in the head, while his partner sought cover in a shop. When questioned in the hospital, Provenzano recalled only feeling a sharp pain before he fainted. A police officer was the sole eyewitness who could provide any useful information, identifying Rina among the gunmen. Initially, several witnesses confirmed Provenzano's involvement, but within a month, they retracted their statements and left Corleone. Captain Dalla Chiesa of the Carabinieri found little evidence to solve these crimes. Shortly after the incident, Dalla Chiesa officially noted Provenzano in his records, accusing him of various thefts, including cattle as well as stealing cheese and a hunting rifle. Soon after, Provenzano went into hiding, starting a life on the run that would eventually set a new record. From that point forward, any talk of peace was abandoned, and Leggio commanded his men to eliminate his adversaries. Leggio's fury wasn't confined to just his mafia rivals. It also extended to innocent locals. Rina ruthlessly shot a traitor in the back, heart and mouth, the final shot serving as a grim warning for anyone who might consider speaking out about Leggio's crimes. Between 1943 and 1961, Corleone was the site of 52 murders and 22 attempted murders. Despite the escalating violence, only one newspaper, the Palermo-based L'Ora, dared to shine a light on the Corleonesi during this period. In 1958, L'Ora published a series of investigative reports detailing the rise of Luciano Leggio in Corleone following the assassination of the previous boss, Michele Navarra. The courageous journalists behind the exposé, Felice Chilanti, Mario Farinella, Enzo Lucchi, Michele Pantaleone, Castrense Dado, and Enzo Peroni, faced swift retaliation. On October 19, 1958, a bomb packed with 5 kilos of TNT detonated outside the newspaper's offices, destroying half of the printing press. Undeterred, the newspaper hit the stands just 2 days later, with a bold front-page headline declaring, "The Mafia threatens us. The investigation continues." From early 1961, Leggio adopted a more covert approach than the typical street shootings known as the Lupara Bianca, or the white shotgun. This method was particularly reserved for those Leggio deemed especially despicable, individuals he believed didn't deserve to be mourned by their families. In 1963, Leggio planned to use the Lupara Bianca once more in the final stages of the 5-year feud, targeting Francesco Streva, Navarra's most feared lieutenant. Streva was described by the police as sly, courageous, and vindictive. However, Provenzano and another accomplice failed in their first attempt, with Provenzano sustaining a shoulder wound from Streva. 4 months later, Streva was lured into a trap by Leggio. Provenzano, along with another accomplice, ambushed and killed Streva, along with his 2 bodyguards and even the guard dog that accompanied them. This bloody feud, which concluded with Leggio as the uncontested boss of the now notorious Corleonesi, served as a ruthless training ground for Rina and Provenzano, who carried out their violent acts with complete impunity. For Leggio, dominating Corleone was merely a stepping stone. His ambitions extended to Palermo. He turned his attention to the city, where Christian Democrat Mayor Salvo Lima, the son of a mafioso, held sway. The Corleonesi had a powerful asset in Palermo's political landscape, a direct line to Vito Ciancimino, the city's public works councillor. Vito Ciancimino was pivotal during the city's building boom, acting as the crucial link between politicians who awarded contracts, the businesses that carried them out, and the mafia that took its share. Under Lima and Ciancimino, Palermo saw a surge in construction activity, with over 4,000 building permits issued between 1959 and 1963. Astonishingly, 80% of these permits were granted to inexperienced frontmen funneling large kickbacks to the mafia. Leggio quickly recognized that Vito Ciancimino was impervious to intimidation, so he entrusted Bernardo Provenzano with the task of building a working relationship with him. To gain any foothold in Palermo, Leggio knew he needed alliances with the city's reigning mafia bosses. Those included the influential Stefano Bontate, leader of Palermo's largest clan. Stefano Bontate, who was among the first to exploit acid for disposing of bodies, harbored disdain for the Corleonesi, mocking them for their rural roots. Despite this, Leggio had already successfully expanded his operations beyond the meat market he had dominated for years, extending his influence into other areas such as the grain market, snooker tables, and pinball machines. This diversification made Leggio wealthy, and those in his circle prospered as well. One of Leggio's initial strategic moves was to form an alliance with the Greco brothers, a prominent family from the coastal village of Ciaculli, east of Palermo. Together, they aimed to challenge the dominant La Barbera clan for control over the lucrative property boom in the city. Salvatore La Barbera, the head of the Palermo Center area, held significant power and influence, particularly in a neighborhood that had become a prime target for developers. He also had a close relationship with the mayor, Salvo Lima. However, Leggio soon found himself overwhelmed as this power struggle escalated into a full-blown war involving all the Palermo mafia families. The murder of Salvatore La Barbera in 1963 intensified the conflict, with his brother demanding answers from the other bosses, only to be met with silence and denials. The war reached a horrifying peak with the Ciaculli massacre, where a car bomb killed 7 policemen. An Alfa Romeo Giulietta, left with a flat tire near mafia boss Salvatore Greco's villa in Ciaculli, was discovered by the Carabinieri after being tipped off. They found a rudimentary explosive device on the back seat, which they believed had been defused. However, when an officer opened the trunk during their search, the bomb detonated, resulting in a massive explosion. The Ciaculli bombing marked a critical turning point, as it brought the full force of the law down on the mafia, ending years of relative impunity. Public outrage over the deaths of the policemen led to the establishment of Italy's first anti-mafia commission, which launched a comprehensive investigation into the mafia's operations. This crackdown resulted in nearly 2,000 arrests. Additionally, the bombing revealed Michele Cavataio's deceitful role in the mafia war, tipping off other clans to his underhanded tactics. According to Tommaso Buscetta, the Mafia Commission was dissolved, and the leaders of Cosa Nostra agreed to suspend all activities to let the intense government scrutiny subside. During this period, Leggio's declining health made him increasingly vulnerable. In the fall of 1963, he narrowly escaped arrest after an informant disclosed that he was suffering from tuberculosis of the spine and was receiving treatment at a Palermo hospital under a false identity. However, Colonel Ignazio Milillo of the Carabinieri mistakenly targeted the wrong hospital, allowing Leggio to slip away. The same year, in December 1963, Toto Riina was arrested. Thanks to the investigations of the Carabinieri, Leggio's hiding place was found to be the house of Leoluchina Sorisi, the girlfriend of Placido Rizzotto, the trade unionist killed by Leggio himself in 1948. On the evening of May 14, 1964, the new police superintendent of Corleone, Angelo Mangano, arrested Leggio. The myth or rumor that Leoluchina was the girlfriend or engaged to Placido was actually untrue. Nearly 60 years later, she would state that she was actually engaged to Pasquale Crescioni, one of the men released or acquitted for the murder of Placido. In 1966, Cesare Terranova attempted to question Leggio, but he refused, pretending not to remember even his own name or his parents. 3 years later, in 1969, Terranova brought Leggio and 63 other mafiosi to trial. Despite facing serious charges, including 9 murders and suffering from poor health, Leggio made a point of attending court sessions regularly. He often appeared on crutches or lying on a stretcher. The prosecution's 2 key witnesses fared poorly. One had a mental breakdown diagnosed as a severe psychological reaction brought on by fear. The other, a barber, fell silent during his testimony and later claimed that he knew nothing. However, the judges and prosecutors were subjected to anonymous threats. When the verdict was delivered, all 64 defendants were acquitted, as the judges cited insufficient evidence for convictions on charges of criminal conspiracy or murder. The court also ruled that Leggio's physical condition made it extremely unlikely that he had directly participated in the murders. He was instead convicted only of a decades-old grain theft and received a suspended sentence. By late 1969, mafia bosses believed they had identified the mastermind behind the first mafia war and the deadly car bombing: Michele the Cobra Cavataio, a notorious boss and builder. His reputation for treachery earned him the nickname, which also alluded to the Colt Cobra revolver he habitually carried. In an attempt to escape trouble, Michele Cavataio claimed to have drawn a map detailing the Palermo mafia families and their members. A claim that could be dangerous given the secrecy of the mafia. On December 10, 1969, 6 mafiosi dressed in police uniforms burst into a real estate office in Viale Lazio in Palermo. Inside the office was Michele Cavataio and his men. The intruders succeeded in killing Cavataio, however, he managed to return fire, killing one of the attackers, Calogero Bugarella. As Tommaso Buscetta later revealed to Giovanni Falcone, this assassination was a clear sign that the killing had the approval of all the major Sicilian families. The hit squad included not only Bugarella from Corleone, but also soldiers from Giuseppe di Cristina's family and Bernardo Provenzano. This event earned Provenzano the nickname Il Trattore, or the Tractor, because like a tractor, he just ground everything to bits, and where he had been, grass no longer grew. The Corleonesi leveraged their newfound infamy to ingratiate themselves with Palermo's mafia bosses. They quickly found an ally in Gaetano Badalamenti. Both Rina and Provenzano acted as loyal enforcers for Badalamenti. Even when Badalamenti was imprisoned, he maintained his influence, sending orders to Rina through intermediaries. After Michele Cavataio's murder led to police raids in Palermo, Badalamenti advised Leggio to take refuge in Catania, on Sicily's east coast near Mount Etna. Leggio was welcomed by Antonino Calderone, whose brother Giuseppe Pippo Calderone was the local mafia boss in Catania. Buscetta explained that Michele Cavataio's assassination marked the beginning of a new phase for Cosa Nostra, which, during its reorganization, was governed by a triumvirate. The triumvirate was composed of Gaetano Badalamenti, Stefano Bontate, and Toto Rina, who acted on behalf of Leggio while he remained in Catania. The Corleonesi now seemed to be on par with 2 of Palermo's most influential bosses. Despite their newfound status, they were financially strained and had yet to tap into the lucrative drug trade that was generating immense wealth for the rest of the mafia. Eager for profit, Bontate was among the pioneers of the drug trade in Sicily. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Bontate and his associates dominated heroin trafficking, operating refineries in Sicily and catering to the American market. In the early 1970s, Leggio left his villa on Mount Etna's slopes and relocated to Milan. True to his ruthless nature, he ordered the murder of Damiano Caruso, a fellow mafioso, who had dared to kill a young soldier that Leggio had taken under his wing. With Leggio now in Milan, Rina quickly became the Corleonesi's primary representative in Palermo. Although he was technically still under Leggio's command, the more reserved and calculating Rina began to establish a strong foothold in the city. He expanded his influence by forming new alliances with mafiosi across Sicily, often without the approval or even knowledge of the clan leaders. With Provenzano by his side, Rina increasingly took control of the Corleonesi's strategy, gradually sidelining Leggio. Bontate scornfully referred to Rina as the peasant from Corleone, underestimating his growing power. As tensions among the triumvirate made meetings nearly impossible, the clans replaced it in the early 1970s with a broader commission composed of over a dozen bosses to oversee Palermo and its surrounding areas. Led by Gaetano Badalamenti, this new commission vowed to uphold the traditional rules of Cosa Nostra, a move that enraged Leggio. In response, Leggio stormed out of one of its initial meetings. However, Rina secured a position on the commission, alternating with Provenzano every 2 years. In 1973, Leonardo Vitali, the first mafioso to break the omerta since World War II, provided investigators with invaluable information about the Mafia's inner workings and the rise of the Corleonesi. Vitali, who had personal knowledge of Rinna, was the first to describe him as one of the Mafia's most powerful bosses. He detailed Rinna's political connections, identified numerous mafiosi, and revealed a plot to murder Judge Terranova. His testimony was significant because it demonstrated that the Mafia was active at a time when many experts believed they never existed. Leggio was finally arrested in Milan on May 16, 1974. Sentenced to life imprisonment in 1975, he is believed to have maintained significant influence over the Corleonesi from behind bars. What Leggio left behind was Salvatore Riina and Bernardo Provenzano. Nicknamed the Beasts because of their ferocity, they were the most dangerous men he had at his disposal. On November 15, 1993, Luciano Leggio suffered a heart attack and died at the age of 68.